You fucking weasel. That wasn't a movie line. It was Denzel Washington. Live, uncensored, on national TV. And for 5 seconds, the room froze. No one laughed, not even Bill Maher. Because in that moment, Denzel wasn't performing. He was exposing something. And what came next? No script could prepare you for it. It didn't begin with rage. It began with theater. Real Time with Bill Maher opened that night like it always did. Bright lights, cheap applause, and the illusion of intellectual honesty. But this episode had a twist. A trophy guest, a living legend. The audience knew it. The promos had said it outright. Denzel Washington, from Oscar to outspoken. And so they came expecting fireworks. Or maybe just another performance. Bill Maher was all smiles when Denzel walked in. Called him the conscience of Hollywood. Said he was proof that dignity and discipline could still make it in America. He leaned forward, chuckling. You're like if Malcolm X had a stylist and a private jet. The crowd laughed. Denzel gave a half nod, his eyes scanning Maher like an architect reading blueprints, watching the foundation beneath the flattery. The energy was smooth, controlled. Too controlled. You could feel it, like a dinner party where every guest knows the host is waiting to make a scene. Denzel answered a few light questions, kept it clean, talked about his mother, about art, about how playing flawed characters reveals more about truth than preaching ever could. Maher nodded along, eyes sharp. He wasn't listening, he was measuring, waiting. And then, 5 minutes in, he fired the first real shot. You speak like you're Malcolm X, but you live like you're Morgan Stanley. The line cut through the air like a switchblade. There was a half second of silence, then laughter, loud and nervous. Not because it was funny, but because they'd been taught to laugh. Bill Maher leaned back, proud of himself. He thought it was clever, edgy, biting, the kind of line that gets clipped and passed around Twitter by people who think sarcasm is revolution. But Denzel, he didn't even blink. He didn't look away, didn't reach for a defense, didn't raise a single brow. He just stared at Bill, not with anger, not with shock, with silence, with something deeper. And then he smiled, not wide, not warm, just enough to say, I see what this is. I've been here before. That smile, it didn't comfort the audience. It made them shift. Because for the first time that night, it became clear. This wasn't going to be a friendly segment. This wasn't two minds exchanging ideas. It was a setup. Bill Maher wasn't interviewing Denzel. He was testing him. He was playing a game he'd played for years. Invite a respected black guest, praise their success, then pivot, subtly, surgically, into questioning their right to speak on injustice. Flatter first, then undermine. Make the crowd complicit with a laugh. Denzel, of course, knew the script. He'd seen this movie. He just never agreed to act in it. Maher pushed again. Look, he added, still wearing that smirk, I'm not saying you haven't earned your place. You have. I mean, you're one of the good ones. You kept your head down. You didn't go crazy like Kanye. That's why people respect you. Another wave of laughter, this one colder. Denzel didn't move, didn't flinch. His eyes stayed fixed. And for a split second, you could see something flicker in Maher's expression, like he realized the crowd was no longer laughing with him. They were waiting, watching, and then came the jab, the one Maher thought would land the knockout. Cat got your tongue, or is the script not in your teleprompter? Gasps, smirks. Then a pocket of uneasy silence. Denzel didn't answer. He didn't need to, because sometimes silence isn't surrender. It's strategy. It's waiting for your opponent to talk themselves into a corner. And in that moment, it was clear. Bill Maher thought he was winning, but he was walking straight into the fire. Bill Maher saw the silence and mistook it for weakness. He misread the stillness in Denzel's face as hesitation, the quiet in his posture as submission. What he didn't recognize, what he never learned, is that some men don't raise their voices to be heard. They wait, they measure, and when they finally speak, it's not noise, it's a reckoning. But Bill wasn't listening. He was performing. Let's be real, he said, waving a hand in mock sincerity. You're a great actor, Denzel, one of the best. But come on, you've been rich for decades, multi-millions. private jets, five-star hotels. How are you still out here talking about the struggles of the black community like you're living paycheck to paycheck? The crowd chuckled, uncertain, scattered. It wasn't the full laugh Maher wanted, but it was enough to keep him going. I mean, he added, leaning forward, this is the same guy who had dinner with George W. Bush. Remember that, Denzel? You shook his hand, smiled for the cameras. You can't be Malcolm X on Monday and a war criminal's dinner guest on Friday. There it was, the switchblade. Subtle at first, now sharpened and swinging without restraint. Denzel sat motionless. Bill pushed harder. I don't blame you, really, he continued, tone syrupy with false pity. That's the game. Play both sides. Keep the image. Be the respectable one. Hell, even the Republicans love you. You're safe. Non-threatening. You're the black guy that doesn't make white people uncomfortable. You smile, you stay out of trouble, and you cash the checks. Still no response. That's when he brought up Kanye. And now you're out here giving speeches, talking about systemic oppression, legacy of slavery, all that heavy stuff. I mean, come on. Next thing we know, you'll be calling yourself Denzel the Messiah. Or worse, you part two. Some people laughed, others didn't. You could feel the divide growing in the room like a hairline fracture spreading across glass. The air was shifting, subtly but undeniably. One half of the audience leaned forward, amused. The other half, uncomfortable, conflicted, watching a man try to dress up mockery as wit and realizing they were being asked to laugh at pain again. Maher didn't notice, or maybe he did, and just didn't care. He flashed that trademark smirk, cocked his head and said it, "Cat got your tongue, or is the script not in your teleprompter?" The crowd murmured, a few forced laughs, a few side eyes. Denzel didn't flinch. He didn't roll his eyes. He didn't even look away. He just sat there, perfectly still, the kind of stillness that doesn't come from confusion or intimidation. It comes from control, total, deliberate, practiced control. Because Denzel knew exactly what this was. He'd seen it before. The strategy was textbook. Provoke until the guest snaps, then spin the clip into, see, they're just angry. And if they stay calm, paint them as inauthentic. Either way, Maher wins. That was the plan. But this time, it wasn't working. Because Denzel wasn't reacting. He was absorbing. And while Bill kept talking, kept twisting his words like knives, Denzel was letting him. Not because he was powerless, but because he was patient. That patience was unnerving. To Maher, to the room, to the viewers at home, watching the scene unfold and starting to realize they weren't witnessing an interview. They were witnessing an autopsy in slow motion. A man exposing himself in real time. Denzel shifted in his seat just slightly, his hands still folded, his posture steady. The silence between them was thick now, not awkward, but heavy, weighted with restraint. And something else, calculation. Maher tried to fill it. Come on, D, he said with a grin. You're not gonna go all stoic monk on me, are you? Give the people a little fire. You're Denzel Washington, for God's sake. The great order. Hit me with something righteous. Still, nothing. And then, finally, Denzel exhaled, slow, measured. He tilted his head just a touch and smiled. Not wide, not friendly, not fake. It was the kind of smile that comes just before a storm breaks the sky open. The crowd sensed it. The crew sensed it. Even Bill Maher, cocky, smug, so sure of himself just minutes ago, sensed it. Because in that smile was the promise of something he hadn't prepared for. Truth without filters. Justice without scripts. And a voice that didn't need volume to shake a room. But Denzel still didn't speak. Not yet. Because sometimes the most dangerous man in the room is the one who's still choosing his first word. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't pound the table or point a finger. But when Denzel finally spoke, it felt like the room itself exhaled, then forgot how to breathe. Bill, he said softly, calmly, do you know the difference between a court jester and a coward? The words hung in the air like a riddle. Maher blinked. A smirk curled at the edge of his mouth, reflexive, defensive. But before he could respond, Denzel continued. The jester makes kings laugh. A pause. Intentional. But the coward? He hides behind sarcasm, 'cause he's too scared to tell the truth. Silence. The kind of silence that falls over a courtroom when a witness says something no one expected to hear. The audience didn't laugh, didn't clap, didn't even shift in their seats. They listened, because now, finally, it was clear. Denzel wasn't there to entertain. He was there to reveal. And what he revealed next didn't come from a script. It came from something deeper, something earned. "You sit here mocking pain you've never lived," he said, eyes fixed on Maher. "You've never buried a cousin shot by police. You've never stood next to a mother who had to scrape her child's blood off the sidewalk with her own hands. You've never had to teach your son how to stay alive during a traffic stop." The temperature in the room dropped. No lighting cue could warm it, because no one was laughing now, not even the ones who laughed earlier. "You think this is entertainment," Denzel said, his voice steady. "I think it's war." Maher shifted in his chair, visibly uncomfortable for the first time. He reached for a sip of water, as if trying to swallow back the moment, but the moment had already shifted. The air had already changed, and Denzel wasn't done. "This isn't about me being rich. It's not about what suit I'm wearing or whose hand I shook 15 years ago. It's about what you're doing, right now, on this stage, with that smirk." His voice remained low, almost too calm, and that's what made it hit harder. "You wear sarcasm like armor. You use irony to dodge responsibility. You call it comedy, but it's cowardice. Because when things get real, when the country is bleeding, you hide behind punchlines and pretend you're just the messenger." The audience shifted. No applause, no gasps, just raw, thick tension. Because Denzel wasn't delivering a monologue. He was delivering judgment. And he wasn't yelling because he didn't need to. He had the room. Even the cameras seemed to tighten their focus. Even the laugh track, usually so quick to save Maher, had gone dead. And then he cut deeper. "You know what the difference is between us, Bill?" he said. "You talk about pain like it's a prop, something to spice up a segment. I carry it every day." He let that sit. "You walk through airports and nobody watches you. I walk through airports and I still see hands hovering over holsters. You get invited to speak on panels about race. I get followed around in bookstores." A single nervous laugh escaped someone in the crowd. Denzel turned his head, just slightly. Don't laugh." The room locked up. "This isn't funny. This is real. And if you need me to smile and nod so you can feel better about your own discomfort, then you don't want truth. You want permission to keep pretending." He looked back at Maher. "And I'm not here to give you that." Maher opened his mouth, but nothing came out. Because what do you say to a man who's not trying to win an argument, but to tell the truth in a place built to silence it? Denzel leaned back. For the first time all night, he broke eye contact. And that's when you knew. He wasn't worried about the next question. He had already taken the mic, the room, and the narrative. This wasn't a rebuttal. It was a redefinition. And as the cameras kept rolling, the only sound left was the breath of an audience finally realizing they hadn't tuned in for entertainment. They had tuned in for something much rarer. A man telling the truth in a room designed to mock it. And then it happened. The shift from discomfort to panic, from sarcasm to silence, from performance to reckoning. Denzel had just laid bare the line between truth and mockery, between live pain and performative wokeness. And Bill Maher, cornered, outmatched, invisibly sweating through his blazer, did the only thing he knew how to do, punch downward. He interrupted. Louder this time, sharper, defensive in a way that barely masked the panic underneath. "You're just another rich black man pretending to be oppressed." It echoed, harsh, ugly, soaked in the entitlement of a man who built his career on saying the thing no one else would dare, and never once stopping to ask whether he should. The crowd gasped, not performatively, not like earlier. This time, it was real. Even the cameras seemed to stutter, pulling tighter, as if they too understood that something irreversible had just been said. For a second, the whole studio felt like it tipped on its axis. And Denzel? He didn't sit in silence anymore. He stood, fast, controlled. Not in rage, but in resolve. The chair behind him scraped slightly as he rose, but no one noticed. Not over the weight of the moment now crackling in the air. His eyes, already steady, flared. Not with anger, with fire, with generations of it, with something older and deeper than this stage could contain. He took a single step forward, and then, without blinking, without hesitation, without softening the blow. "You fucking weasel," 3 words. But they hit like thunder. Not vulgar, not petty, surgical. Every syllable landed with purpose, stripped of artifice, coated in truth so raw it burned. "You sit here profiting from division," Denzel said, voice low and cutting. "You build a career out of mocking the very people whose stories you'll never carry, whose fears you'll never feel." He didn't yell, but somehow his voice filled every inch of the room. It didn't need volume. It had gravity. You turn trauma into punchlines. You turn protest into parody, and you do it all with a wink, so you can still claim you're just being honest. He stepped forward again. Not menacing, not dramatic, deliberate. "But let me ask you something, Bill." The crowd was frozen, silent, hanging on every breath. "How many funerals have you left this studio to attend? How many mothers have you held as they tried to breathe through the sound of their own child's name on the news?" No answer. "How many vigils have you stood in? No cameras, no tweets, just stood, quietly because someone who looked like me got gunned down for existing." Maher opened his mouth, then closed it, because there was nothing to say, and the audience knew it. What followed wasn't applause at first, it was stillness, the kind that breaks through performance and settles into the bones. Then it came, first one clap, then another. Then it swelled, waves of it, not the polite program kind that TV audiences are coached to give. This was different. This was release. Applause that didn't just support Denzel, it indicted Maher. It was a verdict. Some people stood. Others wiped their eyes. A woman in the second row sobbed quietly, her hands over her mouth as if the truth she'd carried for years had just been spoken aloud for the first time. And Maher? He sat still, staring, shrinking. For the first time all night, his mouth didn't move. No jokes, no quips, no rehearsed exit line, just silence. And on the screen, the camera didn't cut away. It zoomed in, closer than usual. Close enough for America to see what it had rarely seen before. Bill Maher with nothing left to say. And Denzel? He didn't smile. He didn't gloat. He just stood there, calm, resolved, unshaken, and said one final thing. "Truth doesn't care how clever you think you sound. It just waits, and eventually it speaks." He sat down, slowly, back straight, face unreadable, and for the first time in a long time, the applause wasn't for entertainment, it was for justice. The applause faded, but the silence didn't. It lingered, heavy and electric, not because the moment had ended, but because something larger had begun. Denzel didn't bask in the crowd's roar. He didn't raise his hand or nod for approval. Instead, he leaned forward slightly, elbows resting on his knees, and spoke again. This time not with fire, but with iron. His voice was low, measured, like a man chiseling stone, not shouting from a stage. "You know why people like me don't come on shows like yours, Bill?" The question wasn't rhetorical. It wasn't bitter. It was bare. Because we're not here to entertain pain. We're here to survive it. And maybe, if we're lucky, teach from it. There it was, the line. The fracture between two Americas, one that packages pain for ratings, and one that has to live through it without edits, applause, or studio lights. The audience leaned in, not a cough or whisper in the air. Even the cameramen, trained to move like ghosts, seemed frozen in place. Denzel continued, not for effect, but because the story was already rising in his chest, like something that had waited too long to be told. "When I was 10, he said quietly, the house next door caught fire. No one moved. We called 911. We screamed from the porch. We waved our arms under the streetlight like we were drowning. And you know what happened?" He didn't pause for drama. He paused for truth. Nothing. The fire department didn't come. They didn't even send one truck, because that neighborhood didn't matter, because black homes didn't burn bright enough for headlines. Somewhere in the crowd, someone gasped. Another person covered their mouth. Denzel kept going, now locked in, not acting, not performing, just remembering. We watched the flames take everything those people owned. We watched a little boy's school books turn to ash. His mother stood barefoot in the grass screaming, and the trucks rolled by on another call. Somewhere safer. He looked at Maher, not with rage, but with something colder, certainty. That's what it means to live in a country where some people's pain is a tragedy and others is just background noise. Bill Maher didn't move. He didn't smirk this time, because Denzel wasn't done. Years later, I played a soldier in a film, spent 6 months studying a man who died in a uniform not much different than mine. That role haunted me, made me stand straighter, think deeper, understand service in a way a script can't teach you. He shook his head, eyes distant. And the week that movie premiered, I flew home through JFK. I was tired, still wearing my crew jacket, had the buzz from the press tour still ringing in my ears. I was proud. Another breath. Then TSA pulled me aside, told me to step out of line, searched me, patted me down like I was smuggling a bomb in my bones. And when I asked why, the agent looked me dead in the face and said, "You fit the profile." You could hear it, the crack in the audience's composure, the shift, the shame. Because now it wasn't about applause. It was about witness. You see, Bill, you don't carry that. You don't walk into rooms wondering if you're going to be the punchline or the suspect. You get to joke about America because it always gave you the benefit of the doubt. Some of us don't get that luxury. We walk around wearing other people's fears like skin. Bill's mouth twitched, an instinct to retort, to deflect, to regain control. But there was nothing to say, because what Denzel had laid out wasn't an argument. It was an indictment, not of Maher alone, but of every media platform that turns outrage into ratings, every studio that cuts trauma into sound bites, every audience that laughs when it should listen. "This isn't just about me," Denzel said, voice steady. "This is about what you do to truth when you put it under lights. You bend it, you sell it, you drain it of weight so people can consume it without choking." He sat back in his chair, shoulders firm, gaze level. "We come on shows like this, not because we trust them, but because sometimes the truth slips through anyway." The studio was still. Bill Maher looked like a man who'd walked into his own house and no longer recognized the furniture. And the audience? They weren't watching a debate anymore. They were watching a reckoning. It wasn't anger anymore. It wasn't fire. It was something quieter and somehow more dangerous. Denzel sat back, not in retreat, but in release, as if the burden he'd carried onto that stage had finally been handed over, not to Bill Maher, not to the cameras, but to the country itself. He turned his head slowly, not toward Maher, not toward the moderators or the producers, twitching behind the control glass, but toward the people, the ones in the studio, the ones at home, the ones who had tuned in for a show and were now sitting in the middle of something else entirely. He looked at them, really looked, and then he asked, "How many times have you been hurt and had to laugh your way through it?" The question came soft, but it pierced. How many times have you watched justice turned into a joke, just so someone else could feel clever on television? A few eyes lowered in the crowd, because everyone had their own version of that moment. The bad day you smiled through, the loss you turned into a punchline, the injustice you let pass because speaking up would make you too sensitive. And now here was Denzel, Oscar winner, icon, public figure, reminding them that behind all the wit and applause and studio polish, real people were bleeding, and not just on the news, but in neighborhoods, in classrooms, in waiting rooms, in quiet rooms where no cameras roll. He didn't speak to the camera. He didn't chase the perfect shot. He spoke to the people in the seats. And somehow, beyond that, to everyone who had ever been told their pain was only worth listening to if it came with a laugh track. His voice didn't rise, but it deepened, rooted in something older than politics, older than entertainment, woven into the bone of survival. I'm not here to win a debate. He said it as if confessing, not performing. I'm not here to out-talk anybody, out-clever anybody. I'm not trying to prove I'm better with words. He looked down for a second, only a second, then back up, gaze unwavering. I'm just trying to keep my soul intact. The words hit harder than any insult that had been thrown all night, because they weren't about Maher anymore. They weren't even about Denzel. They were about the weight of existing with dignity in a system designed to strip it away. The room was still. Not frozen like earlier. This was different. This was reverent, like a sanctuary had been built out of nothing but silence and raw truth. No one clapped. Not yet, because applause would have felt wrong, like breaking a spell. Bill Maher lowered his eyes. He didn't smirk, didn't reach for a comeback. His hands fidgeted near his mug, but he didn't drink, he didn't speak, because there was nothing left to say. Denzel hadn't just flipped the table. He'd exposed what was underneath it, the rot, the cynicism, the theater of it all. And once you see that, you can't unsee it. There was no official end to the segment, no tidy wrap-up, no witty send-off, no final laugh. The show just ended. The cameras stayed still. The theme music didn't play, and in the studio, no one stood to applaud. Not out of disrespect, but out of reverence. Because something had happened in that room, and no one wanted to be the first to pretend it was over. Maher looked down at his desk. The papers in front of him blurred and irrelevant. He reached for his cue card, then didn't read it, because the script no longer applied. Across the country, people sat in their living rooms, still holding their remotes, not ready to move. Not yet. They didn't know whether they had just watched a talk show or a reckoning, and maybe that was the point. The lights didn't dim, the cameras didn't cut, but the show was over. Not with a joke, not with a handshake, not even with credits, just silence. Bill Maher sat frozen behind his desk, his smirk long gone, his note cards untouched. Across from him, Denzel Washington remained still, his shoulders calm, his eyes distant, like a man who had spoken not to be heard, but to be felt. And he had been. In that room, in that moment, something irreversible had taken place. A line had been drawn, not between two men, but between truth and performance, between courage and cruelty, between those who carry pain and those who mine it for clicks. And when the segment quietly faded to black, it wasn't Denzel's voice that echoed. It was ours. Because once you've seen someone stand tall against the weight of mockery, without rage, without noise, without compromise, you start to question the world around you. The one where pain is packaged, clipped, reposted with ironic captions. The one where injustice is trimmed down to fit a trending sound. The one where we scroll past human grief like it's background noise for our lunch break. In a world where suffering is trimmed into 30-second reels, someone still stood up and refused to let anyone laugh at his scars. And maybe that's the purest form of defiance we have left. Denzel didn't win that night with volume. He didn't win with zingers or clapbacks or viral one-liners. He didn't flip the table. He didn't need to. What he did was more dangerous, more enduring. He made the nation uncomfortable, not in a political sense, in a personal one. He made people, viewers, guests, even the host himself, reconsider what it means to listen, to watch, to witness. He reminded us that not every silence is surrender. Some silences are surgical. Some silences are waiting. And when they break open, they don't just expose a person. They expose us all. And so if this story leaves you with anything, let it be this. No one gets to turn injustice into a skit. No one earns the right to turn another man's wound into entertainment. Freedom of speech is not freedom from consequence. And comedy without conscience is cruelty with a laugh track. There's a reason Denzel didn't jump to defend himself at every provocation. A reason he waited. Because real strength isn't loud. It's precise. It's timing your truth so perfectly that the moment you unleash it, no one can look away. That's what he did. That night. That stage. That silence. He took a system built to consume pain and made it choke on his dignity. And when it was over, he didn't spike the mic. He didn't stand for applause. He didn't even look back. Because for him, it was never about winning a moment. It was about protecting something deeper. Self-respect is not for display. It's what you hold on to when everything else is trying to strip it away. So here's the lesson. For the Mahers of the world, for the ones in the audience, for the ones at home, sometimes the strongest man in the room isn't the one shouting. It's the one who waits, who listens. And then, when the time is right, speaks a truth so sharp, the room forgets how to laugh. If you felt something watching this, you weren't alone. If it made you shift in your seat, good. That's what truth does when it's told without apology. And the next time you see someone trying to make pain a punchline, remember this night and ask yourself, are you clapping because it's funny or because you're afraid to feel? Thank you for watching. Thank you for remembering. And above all, don't laugh at the wound just because it isn't yours. In a world addicted to noise, silence, when grounded in truth, is revolutionary. Denzel didn't fight to be right. He stood to be real. He reminded us that dignity doesn't shout, it stands still. That pain is not a prop, and justice is not a joke. We are not better because we speak louder, but because we listen deeper. And when faced with cruelty disguised as comedy, the highest act of courage is to stay rooted in who you are. So let us not applaud the cleverest voice, but the bravest one, the one that dares to speak with soul. If this story made you feel something, don't scroll past. Like, share, and subscribe to Justice Unscripted, where truth isn't polished and silence never gets the last word. Turn on the bell, because the next story won't comfort you. It'll challenge you. Tell us what moment hit you the hardest. Drop it in the comments. Let's remember what we saw. Let's not look away. This dramatized story is rooted in real injustice and the quiet strength it takes to confront it. It wasn't made to entertain. It was made to wake us up. Thanks for watching. And remember, true justice doesn't perform. It perseveres. This is Justice Unscripted.